Right, good evening, everybody. Good to see our audience, many visiting members, Sir Bob and others, faces we recognise. Thank you, welcome. Right, so the usual warning, in event of emergency, could say follow Cabinet, because we'll set an example and leave swiftly down the back of the town hall main staircase, or out, well, actually on the back to the high street, then to the car park behind the town hall. Right, so this meeting is being streamed live over the internet and will be available to listen to afterwards, and there's some of us who'll be sad enough to glance. Right, use of mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, by visitors is welcomed. You're requested to use them discreetly, which always reminds me to make sure that rule applies to me as well. And not to disturb the meeting, to set them to silent please, and not to use voice or camera flash functions. Many of you coming here to speak will be used to the microphones, but Cabinet members and officers as well, please make sure you do. Introduce the work of the Cabinet. It's the main executive body of the Council. It's responsible for day-to-day decision making on all Council services, makes recommendations to full Council on major policy issues and on the Council's budget. So Cabinet is made up of 7 councillors, each of whom is responsible for a particular range of services. I'll introduce myself and then ask colleagues to introduce themselves in turn. I've got apologies for absence and sickness from Councillor Corey and Councillor Jay. My name is David King, I'm leader of the Council. I'll go to my far left, Natalie.
Councillor Natalie Summers, portfolio holder for Communities, Heritage and Public Protection, and ward member for St Anne's St John's.
Martin Goss, Mile End Ward, portfolio holder for Neighbourhoods, Waste and Leisure.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Smith, portfolio holder for Housing, Councillor for St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Councillor Andrew Luxford-Vaughan, ward councillor for Wivenhoe and portfolio holder for Planning, Environment and Sustainability.
I've asked the first rung at least of officers to introduce themselves, starting with the Chief Executive.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Pam Donnelly, Chief Executive.
Good evening, Andrew Weavers, Head Governance and Monitoring Officer.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Manager.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so let's move on. Item 2, urgent items. Andrew?
There are none, Chair.
Declarations of interest. Are there any from Cabinet members? No. Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the minutes of our meeting of the 29th of January 2025. Can I ask you if we agree those? Thank you. Item 5 is have your say. So I'll call them in the list I have them, in the order I have them rather, and go from there. So first off, Sir Bob Russell, our High Steward. Bob, please come forward. You know this really well.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish to talk about local government disorganisation proposals. But before I do that, while I do attend every meeting at Cabinet, I do attend quite a few. I notice again tonight you haven't got a full complement. This is the penultimate meeting of the year, 10 months in, and I believe there's only been one meeting where there's been a full attendance. As you indicated, this is the most important part of the Council. It's good that Councillor Smith is here after his numerous absences. I did raise this with you, Chairman, back in the autumn, and I think the duties of elected councillors, elected by the people who represent them, are to attend meetings, not go off on world cruises. Now, coming on to the question of local government reorganisation, this was a white paper published by the government in December. I raised it at the Cabinet meeting on the 29th of January. I'm aware there's a full council meeting next Monday, What I'm not aware of is what deliberations there have been done within the council, with councillors in groups or whatever. I don't make this as a boast, but I'm the only one still standing who's involved in local government reorganisation more than half a century ago. I do have knowledge, I do have experience. I've offered the group leaders to speak to groups, and while that offer has not been taken up, I can say that individually I have had conversations with 8 separate councillors, which is very useful. All of them, Chairman, are opposed to what is proposed. In fact, it'd be interesting to know if any councillors of Colchester City Council do support what is proposed. So, Chair, the public have not been involved in any shape or form, which I think is regrettable. I don't know what deliberations have been made with councillors. It hasn't been done in public if there have been deliberations. And I repeat the point I made last time, that the merger of Braintree, Colchester and Tendring into a North Essex council is not local. A council that stretches 40 miles from Jaywick to Wethersfield is not local. And Colchester, on this very site, since 1189, this is the 3rd building, since 1189, there has been a Colchester council of whatever description doing self-governance. And I think it's regrettable that a government, which didn't even have this in its manifesto, is proposing to do away with Colchester City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll let Councillor Smith respond to the first point, as it was so personal.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's quite right. I wasn't at the last Cabinet meeting because I was on my honeymoon. And whilst I was on that honeymoon, I did actually have numerous conversations with various members of the Cabinet and do a significant number of portfolio holder decisions. But you're quite right, and I'm sure on behalf of my wife and I, as I'm learning to say it now, we very much welcome the help and support that we've had from councillors across the chamber, and thank you all for their support to help us celebrate our wedding. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Smith. The one point, Bob, about attendance and Cabinet, and I know it's not an executive body that you would prefer to have, or we're working as we are here, we are working hard. I am really clear about that, and not everything has to be in a public forum. There's an awful lot, many hours are spent behind it. My recollection of attendance is perhaps a little bit more generous than yours, Councillor Smith, is after one particular point. If as for example, Councillor Jay decides, because she's very unwell and has COVID, that it'd be better for her not to come, I'm absolutely behind that. You'll understand that, Bob. So let's not talk about that, move on to your substantial item around LGR. So there's a couple of specific questions in there, or implicit questions, and here's my take on them. First of all, did this council seek this? We've had, you and I, in person, that conversation. No, we didn't. Do councillors here support it? Well, we'll see next week. My sense is that the broad view of many is a reluctant realism about this, which says if the policy's been set, if the government's set the way ahead, if the English white paper on devolution is there and is the strongest signal of what government intends to do, subject to that process, most of us, including me, are absolutely up for what we have to do. The conversation we had before, which is to make the most of this, least harm, most good. And while we're at it, ensure that the things that matter a lot to you, Bob, amongst others, is keeping that local sense of place, civic tradition, and so on. All of that we're going to address as best we can. In terms of sharing information and discussing this with members, and I've chaired a number of sessions which have done just that, workshops in person, briefings across Greater Essex, but as again you know, this has been framed by government and it's being led by the unitaries, and it's our response to this that's now what we must focus on. And as somebody who wasn't a great enthusiast for this and who recognises, as you described, the distance between place that's the biggest risk of the changes that lie ahead. We're just determined to minimise the issues and risks that might come from that and to make the most of it. And we should, in fairness, say that this is two parts to the whole. So devolution is an undoubted potential for significant benefit if, in my view, Bob, if, and the view of many, if over time, power, influence and funding does come down to more local level. That's just my take, Bob. As to LGR, that's, in my view, is the biggest of the challenges, but scale does have some advantages, and we must accept that local government is struggling to deliver its core roles at the moment. So all that lies ahead of us, but I can be very clear that we're doing our very best to engage and involve, and that's all I personally and we collectively can do. Back to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. A local council with a population of 500,000 is not a local council. I hope I'll be able to have a bit more to say on Monday if I'm allowed to speak. What the government proposing is devolution, is what they call it. It is in fact the sucking up of powers from local level to a middle level, used to be Essex County Council. The whole thing has not been thought through. The white paper I've read from cover to cover, 116 pages. The word democracy does not appear once. What they're proposing, if it's the pattern put out in the white paper happens, there'll be only 20 councillors or thereabouts representing Colchester, where currently there are 60, 51 city councillors, 9 county councillors. There'll be more to say. I congratulate Councillor Smith on his marriage and his honeymoon. But it doesn't alter the fact that his attendance record prior to his honeymoon was pretty appalling.
Right, Bob, before you go, I don't accept the last, and let's not keep having it so personally here in this room. I don't think that's right. But you're entitled to make your point. You've had a response. Could I just bear with me one correction? I'm absolutely clear, both on the example elsewhere and what I can see coming for us, and Bob, we'll have this conversation again, I'm sure, that devolution is downward. There will be interfaces between the new unitary authorities, the one-stop shop, that many of us have actually in some respects argued, even if we may dislike the scale, that's another kind of conversation to be had. But devolution is different. This is coming down. The way this will work will, apart from the interface required, will not be about sucking up power from the local councils. In fact, for many of us, it might add to what we're able to do. We may differ, Bob, but thank you. We might, Bob, yeah. Thank you very much, Sir Bob. Jean Quinn. Jean, welcome. And again, I think you know us well enough. I hope so too.
I never know. Red is go. I'm a cyclist, right? Red is go. Right, well, first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak here this evening. I know a lot of people come. Well, first of all, I'm really appreciative of what you do as councillors. I know you give a lot of your time and you work incredibly hard, and I, for one, no matter what political party you are, I do appreciate you doing that. And I know people come here and criticise you and give you brickbats. Well, that's not my intention tonight, it really isn't. I've come here genuinely to want to know the answers to some questions, and they're following on the motion that you passed unanimously at your full council meeting in December. I've forwarded 7 questions, which I assume you've all had sight of. I'm not going to read them because I don't want to bore you all to death. And I'm not going to go through all 7, but there was just 1 or 2 I wanted to pick out that I thought were the most important. And the questions I really want to ask are, have you approached Essex County Council with a view to implementing the speed limit of 20 miles an hour? And that was recommended by a report that you presumably have had sight of as well. And if you've done that, have you had an understanding of the budget that will be allocated and a timescale? The other point I want to make about asking what are your plans to find out what people want, because that was the key part of your amendment that you all carried. Personally, I think you've taken on a task of Hercules, but that's your business. And the question is, when it says what people want, is it going to be a simple like Brexit, 51% and it goes ahead? What would you do if you had two adjoining streets and one street wanted 20 and one didn't? The other thing I want to point out is that there have been national surveys that you might want to lean on, which show anything between 63 and 70% of people want it. And that's in the country. But if you go closer to home, more recently, Wivenhoe Town Council put their newsletter through every letterbox in Wivenhoe, and there was a survey slip there for people to reply to. A, they had the biggest take-up of a survey that they've ever had, and B, 85% of people supported it. And finally, I just want to say the thing that gives me the most fear, which is, can you give us a guarantee that with local government reorganisation, that won't derail this process? Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I'd pass to my good colleague Andrea Luxford-Vaughan. Just say to the last point, if I might, I think LGR might be an enabler.
Sorry, it might be
an enabler because
right?
Because as it would form, this place will have a unitary authority as opposed to having to work at some distance. With all respect to our Essex County Council colleagues, that is the reality at the moment. Andrea.
So I've got that in blood, have I, David?
Well, mine anyway.
Right.
Okay, first question, yes, we have written to Essex.
Oh, lovely.
Second question, do we have an idea of the budget? No. And obviously they would, well, actually it wouldn't necessarily be them that leads on it, but we know we haven't. I think we'd have to take advice about the best way to consult. I personally have no idea. Obviously, I was involved in the Wivenhoe Town Council referendum, as it were, and it was not as straightforward as you might think it was, and nor was. Well, no, it was complicated, and the amount of drafts we went through. This is probably not relevant to this meeting, but the amount of drafts we went through of how to put that to the public was extraordinary. So actually looking at best practice would be my start point on that. The rest of your questions were very detailed and they deserve an answer, but I've asked officers, because I wasn't really in a position to do that, and they've asked for time because some of those go to Essex. So if you could be patient, they think within 2 weeks, within 2 weeks we'll be able to give you a written answer to all of those questions.
You can, Jean, thank you.
Thank you. Right. And thank you for all those answers. Yeah, and I will delve deep into Wivenhoe. Let's just see what we come up with. I would just like to say that thank you for all your time, and I know you to be a very sincere and conscientious councillor, for whom I have a great deal of time. You did say to me at one meeting, "Don't be dismayed." So I've taken that to heart. Now, I am a sewer and I'm in danger of getting my canvas and needle and sewing "Do not be dismayed" and displaying it in my home as a reminder of what you've said. So I'm going to look at best practice, and within 2 weeks I'll get an email with the answers to those questions. Thank you. I appreciate that they were detailed. Thank you very much for your time. I really, really do appreciate that.
No, thank you, and thank you for your generous remarks to us all. Thank you. The next on our list, Sarah Buzzard. Sarah, are you here?
Hello. Congratulations on pronouncing my last name right. You're one of very few. Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I've come here today to have a conversation with you about the council's investments, and I'm asking you, as somebody with a pension in the local government pension service, to make sure that the council is investing any funds in, and including that's the pension service funds, in any kind of fossil fuel investments, quarrying, nuclear energy, arms companies and so on. According to a new report from the UK CIF, which came out, I think, last week, the UK's share of exposure to stranded fossil fuel assets is £113 billion, which equates to about 2,500 per person in the working population. Of that, 15.2 billion is in UK pension funds fossil fuels assets, and those are at risk. In the last a couple of years, the World Economic Forum has highlighted that over the past 20 years, extreme weather events have cost an estimated $2.8 trillion, which breaks down to about 16 million per hour. And in a warming scenario between 2.5 degrees and 2.9 degrees, climate-intensified natural disasters may lead to $12.5 trillion in economic losses within 25 years. The World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report from this year highlights that extreme weather events is second only to armed conflict. Now, businesses and investors are already changing their practices and moving away from fossil fuel investments because they recognise the risk to their profits and their portfolios, but they're also seeing that there are opportunities to be had from decarbonising. The Climate Change Committee last week released its 7th carbon budget, and decarbonising will require investment, but we should start seeing the savings in this budget period. And actually, they've revised down the net cost of what it will cost the UK, and it's less than what they thought when they last gave advice in 2020. And they estimate that 65 to 90% of that will be paid by the private sector. So another report that was released a couple of weeks ago by the Confederation of British Industry highlighted that between 2023 and 2024, the net zero sector grew by 10.1% and generates £83.1 billion in gross added value. So for every £1 spent, the value generated by the net zero economy creates an additional £1.89 in the wider economy. And each full-time role generates over 100,000 in economic value, which is 38% above the UK average. So essentially, there are huge amounts of opportunities to be grasped, but we can only do that if the policymakers put in place the right guardrails and the right policies. So I'm asking you to please take that into account and take that into consideration when you make your decisions.
Well, thank you very much. For my many sins, I sit on the Essex Pension Fund. And so I've had a quick reminder to myself, talking to colleagues about where we stand. I don't think there's anybody on that committee who doesn't understand absolutely what you've described of extreme events changing the world around us. But I'm sure you'll understand that you don't make a transition in a day. It's a long, complex process. But perhaps I can give you just a few illustrations of where I think we are and where we're heading. So excuse me if I look at some of my notes. So, well, that's fair enough, isn't it? Yeah, good. So look, we're actively transitioning, we would say. So what does that mean? Well, the attitudes have changed. The interchanges with the professionals who invest for us, who we task, have changed. We are signing up to things we should, including a commitment to achieving net zero by 2050 in terms of and it is an extraordinary and a very successful pension fund. It's got towards £12 billion invested on behalf of pensioners. And if I just say to you, of course, the challenge is whatever we do with what is their money, public money in a form, but it's our pensioners' contributions and their employees' contributions. We have to do this in a wise way because we still have to generate the receipts that will enable them to have a pension in later life. So, we are in a complex and challenging place, but I'm really clear that my colleagues and I and our advisors have that responsible investor approach that's alive to what you've described. So we're signatory of the Financial Reporting Council's Stewardship Code, which includes a focus on sustainable investment. We've got programs of engagement with those who act on our behalf, just to make sure they're really clear how our judgments of their effectiveness include how they take this into account. And we're starting to move money away from industries with high carbon output towards low carbon, sustainable and environmentally responsible investments. And a couple of examples would be low carbon global equities, there's a phrase, some money targeted for, in total is towards £1 billion, but in schemes that include renewable energy, reforestation, carbon capture and storage, and decarbonising buildings, and so on and so forth. So, we, Essex, are in a transition which I understand is happening elsewhere. So that's the best response I can give to your position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's actually really encouraging to hear. It means that I might keep my pension with the local government pension service instead of moving it elsewhere. I would say if you can move faster, that would be ideal, because 2050 is actually not that far away, but I will still be working at that point. So, it's, far enough away, but not that far, especially, given the increasing events that we're seeing. And I would ask you, which you probably are aware of, to sort of adhere to the pensions regulator guidance on this for trustees, and also take note of the Financial Markets Law Committee's opinion that they published last year, about this time last year, saying that you need to take essentially climate considerations as a financially material lens to your considerations.
We do. It's
Brilliant.
my take. Thank you very much. It's
Thank
an
you.
interesting subject to bring to this place. Thank you.
Yeah.
Barry Gilhaney. I hope I've got that right, Barry. My apologies if I haven't. Welcome. We had a briefest of words before, and as you settle yourself in, I just sort of say you, of course, here to speak on behalf of an organisation for which we have a great deal of time, which is RAMA, Refugee and Migrant Association in Colchester. So over to you, Barry.
First of all, thanks for having me. As you state, I'm a volunteer on behalf of RAMA, and RAMA is very grateful for the generous support that City Council has given to it. I'm here to talk specifically about a community, namely the 500 Ukrainians who've settled here to the Ukraine Home Scheme. And I wish to address concerns particularly around the indefinite to leave remain criteria. As you know, indefinite leave to remain is awarded after 5 years. For some, 8 to 18 months to go. For some, they may be able to achieve that status through sponsorship work or whatever. Unfortunately, there are a big group who are not covered by that. Their 3 years residence here does not qualify 1 day towards indefinite leave to remain. Now, 70% of the clients RAMA works for will be quite happy to go back to Ukraine when it is safe to do so. The problem is that there are a substantial cohort, for example, parents with children with illness and mental health needs that would not be met should they go back. Parents of teenagers who will be sitting the GCSEs should they be asked to leave. You have hospital doctors, clinical psychologists, people that run businesses, run taxis. All those potentially could be sent back to Ukraine 18 months from now. So I'll just I'll give a couple of examples of clients who feel really worried. My son is adapting so well here to British culture and society and English language, which he speaks fluently now, but does not speak Ukrainian and doesn't want to, even when I talk to him. I'm very worried about his psychological development and health if we're asked to leave here. He was 3 years old when we came here and is now 5 years old. His father died defending Ukraine in 2025. We are worried because my family has been moving around since the first occupancy in 2014. My hometown, Slaviansk, is in the Donbass, has been under daily Russian attack, and the whole region is almost entirely occupied by now. My children do not see themselves there, they want to live, study and work in the UK. Of course I'm worried about what basically schools and hospitals would close, there would be no education. So I just urge you all to pay attention to these changes and to recognise that this community has shown a commitment to living and working in the UK and have already made substantial contributions locally and nationally.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Natalie to reply.
Hi, thanks for coming today, and yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with the majority of what you say, and I'm sure you're aware of the government position. It's that the Ukraine scheme only provides temporary sanctuary whilst the war remains ongoing, and that they're not a settlement in the UK, and this is in line with the express wishes of the Ukrainian government, who want their nationals to return to help rebuild the country when it's safe to do so. So this permanent resident or indefinite leave to remain is not allowed, and it makes it different from the general standard visas or grants of refugee status, which do allow for that permanent residence. But as you know, Colchester is a city of sanctuary. We have always welcomed refugees. I was at the anniversary event a couple of weeks ago in the old library. I heard many of their stories, and they're heartbreaking. And yeah, I don't want to see anybody made to leave this country whilst they built a life here. So we'd like to assure you of our continued support to everybody, and by our politicians and the dedicated team that work hand in hand with Rama. And they do meet regularly with our MP, Pam Cox, where all our concerns are raised with resettlement. And we will ensure that all these issues are raised again, particularly, as I say, with respect to the stories you've given there, because, as you say, if a child's come over when they're a toddler or even, you know, born here, and that they've grown up in the school system and their all friends are here, you know, it can do real damage if they are sent back. So these cases really do need looking at, and we'll endeavour to make sure our MP is fully appraised of all these, and can take this forward to Parliament and to the Labour Party, so that they can actually look at these and have perhaps a bit more flexibility in the scheme as it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie, for that. Now, I'm not second guessing what negotiations have gone on between our government and that of Ukraine, but some of Rama's clients are concerned of conscription, of being sent to fight in the front line should they return. And you know what? Okay, there's a ceasefire at the moment. How long will it hold? What is the longer term future in that region? What's the longer term geopolitical balance in that region? And to me, 18 months is not, personally speaking, it's not long enough. Syria, and also Syria's civil war lasted 8 years and started again. So it's making those sort of arbitrary cut-off points, I think, is very invidious.
Yeah, no, as I say, I agree with all those points, and as I say, yeah, we will continue to raise these with our MP, so she can, as I say, take them forward and put our views to the government.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Barry. Lisa Cross, please. Hello, Lisa. Welcome. It's already up and on. The red button is a light, so you can speak when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you for your time this evening. I was pleased to hear that Essex is transitioning towards sustainable investment in its pension funds. And I'd just like to ask whether the City Council is actually transitioning away from sustainable practices in its vote tonight to potentially revoke the glyphosate ban as a citywide management strategy for wild flowers and weeds. So I'm asking you tonight, please, not to revoke the glyphosate ban. I understand it only costs less than 0.5% of the council's annual council tax income. I'd like you to proactively work towards an alternative, of which I understand there are several that have been put forward by Green councillors. As a resident of Colchester, a nature lover and an environmental campaigner, I was so impressed by Colchester City Council's previous decision to move away from the use of toxic herbicides. I believed that you recognised its harmful short and long-term effects on all living things, not just unwanted plants. As a means to explain the biodiversity benefits of allowing wild plants to grow in our city, I'd like to highlight 2 local examples. Firstly, I have personally maintained a non-spray zone around my home. I live on Grinstead, so anybody can do it. And a community garden that I maintain. And that's for the past 5 years. And all I did was I liaised with council contractors, put a few polite signs up, and asked them not to spray around my property. Several other neighbours found out what I was doing and took this approach. And we noted that pollinators, I won't explain what they are necessarily, they'd be abundant in the area around our homes, but elsewhere, public areas, alleyways, play parks, etc., would just appear barren of any life. When the City Council then went on to ban glyphosate use, we noticed the number of pollinators increased. We'd see bees and butterflies around areas that we hadn't seen before, and that was because there were wildflowers growing. Secondly, Professor Ted Benton, who some of you may know as a renowned local naturalist, he also has been monitoring this situation in the area where he lives, and particularly Priory Street. He wrote an article for Colchester Natural History Society and continues to monitor the situation. He noticed in Priory Street 22 flowering plants, including some rare ones. He also noted that these annuals just died away of their own accord and caused no management issues. Have I a few seconds? Yes, thank you. Okay, so it's not just insects, of course. Birds eat the seeds, and sorry, I've lost my thread, beg your pardon. We are suffering a man-made biodiversity crisis, not only in the UK, but worldwide, and one of the culprits in creating this crisis is herbicides. A biodiversity crisis does not only affect wild creatures, of course, it reduces our food supply, our resistance to disease, and our ability to combat aggressive and dominant pest species. It's pure common sense to say, therefore, that using herbicides on a citywide scale does not contribute to any biodiversity strategy or sustainable practice adopted by Colchester City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Lisa, for sharing that information, your views. We also have, I believe, several councillors coming in to talk about the same item 8.2. And I'm not in a position to preempt the debate or the discussion or the decision later on. So I'd encourage everyone to stay around for 8.2 because obviously we'll deal with this issue then. But as a principle, we're definitely not transitioning away from a sustainable way from sustainable solutions. So in general, I can definitely answer that. And that's really all I can help you with now. If you can wait for 8.2 and listen, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. It would just be amazing to see money not being put first. I appreciate councils are cash strapped, but it's a small amount of money. I happen to know that several contractors who are currently dealing with weeds by hands around the area that I live, which I have given away, but are not pushed for time, are not stressed. They have time to stand and talk for quite some. So I think it's better to look at what their staff are doing, monitor that, than step into a dangerous, toxic situation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for time and trouble, and I understand it. We will understand it can feel awkward there, but thank you for coming and sharing what you care about so much. It's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Got Martin Pugh. I think Martin's coming in online. And there he is. Martin, welcome.
Evening. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yes, good evening and thank you. Firstly, on glyphosates, just echo what Lisa said. I know that Friends of Middlewick stand in full support of the campaign to keep glyphosate out of Colchester streets, parks and playgrounds. The case against its use is clear. The risks to biodiversity, human health and our four-legged companions as well, of course, are well known. It would be really sad and worrying to see the good work and forward thinking of the council to be undone here. On the topic of the importance of flowers and pollinators, I'd like to talk about the recent habitat destruction of Middlewick, which some of you might be aware of. For our 8 years of relentless campaigning and surveys, we've moved from a presumption for development to a presumption for protection of Middlewick Ranges, supported by your own independent ecologists and Natural England. But while the development threat has receded, the MOD is now actively destroying sensitive habitats. The MOD has confirmed its plan to cut and maintain a permanent 20-metre fire break across 14 hectares of Middlewick's nationally important acid grassland and the neutral grassland at Weir Lane, which supports barn owls. This is the equivalent of 21 football pitches worth, permanently degraded as biodiverse habitat into low-value amenity grassland like Abbey Fields and Castle Park, which many of you don't have to be an ecologist to see the difference between the buzzing and thriving Middlewick Ranges, wildflower and Abbey Field, for example. The cutting every 2 to 4 weeks would obliterate rare fungi, invertebrates, vital edge habitat for nightingales, barbicel bats and other protected species. This comes on top of last year's destruction of nightingale habitat. And of course, they need these wild edges, these wild spaces. And in 4 to 5 weeks' time, 20 nightingales will return to find their habitat either clear felled or cut back. Fire risk is real, and no one wants fires, including the wildlife, and certainly we don't, but the management must be evidence-based. The MOD has ignored expert survey data offered to help plan their cutting regime. They've ignored alternative fire mitigation strategies that don't require permanent habitat destruction. And the fact that grass cuttings are now actually being left in place and not collected for hay, which ironically can increase fire risk. The MOD's own sanctuary magazine boasts its responsible management at other wildlife sites, but those are SSSIs, largely. Middlewick, without its legal protection, is being treated as disposable. And as a community, it really feels like we're being held hostage in a way. For 8 years, we've lived with this uncertainty. We've had a significant planning victory, but instead of peace of mind, we now wake up to fresh destruction every few weeks and months. Local residents are on high alert. It's really stressful watching the land being degraded before our eyes, and that sense of powerlessness to stop it. Middlewick is a nailed-on SSSI. The experts agree we now need Natural England to designate and offer that full-term protection, prevent permanent loss of the habitat and damage, which, as we know, many know as Colchester's ecological crown jewel. That would really provide some well-deserved reassurance and peace of mind to residents. We hope Colchester can step in and act as liaison, really, to encourage Natural England to designate and the MOD to ease off and stop this relentless habitat destruction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. I'll refer this to Councillor Luxford-Vaughan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, unfortunately, you don't want to hear this, but we don't have any control over what private landlords do in terms of the management, not private landlords, private landowners do in terms of management of their land. And you've probably got more likely influence over them than we will have, because you can go to the press and say awful things about them if you think that would help. And you're right, Natural England that are the ones that would designate a SSSI, and we know that that's their recommendation, and that process I'm unfamiliar with and how long it takes. But certainly I'm happy to go back to officers and see what kind of pressure or dialogue we can have with them to see what that timeline could potentially be. But I don't have I can't make any guarantees about how we would necessarily be able to push that forward for you at this stage.
Martin, do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, thank you again for your work on this. And I think with your contacts and acting almost as a a kind of diplomatic kind of facilitator, that would be really very much appreciated, reaching out to the MOD. We want to work with them constructively to get the best result for Middlewick and for Natural England too. Just very briefly on the glyphosate, I'd like to mention that the report on glyphosate, there wasn't very much in that, as I understand, on education and signage. Just back to this really important topic, because it is being voted on this evening. When explained, actually, you find a lot of people come round and realise they favour a few more wild plants and pollinators rather than this sterile and toxic environment. One great way actually I've seen is drawing chalk around wild plants and naming them, which again, something that could relate to Middlewick as well. Like you find on nature reserves, you get the signage and the education goes a huge way. Like Lisa said, the wildlife in our living world, we all depend on it, and it's under attack at the moment. And yeah, we hope that Colchester City Council can be proud of the original decision and ditch kind of the chemical poisoning of the wild plants using glyphosates. And yeah, I hope that can be a constructive vote and a step forward, not a step back in biodiversity commitments. And we see the work you're doing for Middlewick as well. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Martin, we'll have a conversation around the table, but again, as was said earlier, this is not going back to where we were before. This is a very much narrower conversation around the potential for very limited circumstances in which it might be appropriate, because we've got other responsibilities as well we have to balance. So we'll have that conversation later on against that item, but thank you for taking the time to dial in. We have two more have your say speakers, and Ismail, I'm going to get this wrong in pronunciation, but please come up, introduce yourself, reinforce our understanding, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Dear members of the Cabinet, in accordance with the reports and findings of Amnesty International, United Nations Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Watch, IPC, and other international human rights organizations, including 17 Israeli human rights organizations that also include Yesh Din and B'Tselem, I come here to ask you to follow the obligatory rulings of ICJ and make sure that no council-managed funds, including LGPS, are used to invest in companies that facilitate Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine through arms, loans, and investments. Following the horrible terror attack in October 2023, Israel's occupation of Gaza killed around 50,000 and injured over 100,000 Palestinians. According to UN data, over 25 tons of explosives have been dropped in Gaza, destroying 9 in 10 houses, 70% of crop fields, and more than 80% of all schools, all universities, and health facilities. Since December 2023, more than 90% of the population face high acute food insecurity level on IPC level 3 or above. In May 2024, United Nations Independent International Commission also documented Israel's blockage and restriction of water, electricity, and aid trucks in Gaza as, quote, intention to weaponize the provisions of necessities to hold the population of Gaza Strip hostage. Investigative reports of United Nations Special Committee, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Euromed Human Rights Monitor all found, quote, reasonable grounds that the threshold of Israel committing genocide is met. Following the rulings of ICJ in January and July, the ICJ also affirmed that, quote, there is possible evidence of genocide, and explicitly, quote, called upon the obligation of states to not recognize, aid, or trade with relations that assist the maintenance of Israel's illegal occupation of Palestine. Israel was also found, quote, breaching international prohibition of crime of apartheid and racial segregation in the occupied territories of Palestine. As member to ICJ and Genocide Convention, as UK being, member to ICJ and Genocide Convention, I am asking Council to support immediate divestment of any funds administered by the Council from any companies that deal with, provide investment or loans to arms, and end their financial ties with companies on United Nations list of businesses involved in the illegal settlements of occupied Palestine territory. Many councils, including North Somerset Council, Tower Hamlets Council, Bristol City Council, Manchester City Council, Islington, Lewisham, and Waltham Forest Pensions have already taken similar steps and passed motions to comply with UK's obligations set out by the ICJ and Genocide Convention and committed to cut their financial ties with companies complicit in Israel's breaches of international law. And I hope you join them. Thank you.
Thank you. You will understand why I will not, because I haven't got the time for it. Interesting debate, discussion that will be. I'm not going to comment on international law, breaches of, how that is seen. There is a dark history, let's acknowledge that, but I'm not going to go into that today. But as I've discussed with your brother, I do understand your interest in investments by the City Council or those on our behalf. So I'll repeat my earlier answer, which is in accordance with our own treasury management strategy, what we do with our monies when we have them, beyond spend them on our residents. We don't invest in companies in any kind of direct way of any kind other than our own, those who provide services to residents. Our employee pension funds are not invested by us either. They're invested by, second time tonight we're talking about Essex Pension Fund. They act on behalf of several hundred employers who are in the scheme across the whole of Essex. And they invest, it is true, in a great variety of commercial enterprises through a whole set of means, bonds, stocks, shares. But given the complexity and breadth of their investment, as I said earlier, towards £12 billion, there's a deep practicality about all of this. I don't see them track this. It must be possible, by the nature of things, that some investments may be in companies with a direct or indirect relationship with Israel. That's just being realistic about the connected way of commercial life. But that's for the fund, and that's not for this council. Their decisions are independently made. They're within a legal framework, as you'd expect, within an ethical framework, for that matter, which encourages responsible investment. And one gave some examples earlier, how responsible investment can change the world around us for better, for example, in looking for alternatives to fossil fuels. I know that's not your focus, but I want to be really clear that they do the best in the circumstances to have, given their responsibilities, again, to their pensioners, to secure returns and a pension for the future. So there is nothing here directly in the gift of the City Council. If you wanted to pursue this, and you might, then my suggestion would be that you go to the pensions regulator, who may be able to give you a view. And you could go to the Essex Pension Fund or others who can give you some advice on the ethical framework, but that's as far as I could give you in terms of advice. But we do not here invest in companies in the way that you've alluded to, nor buy in that way. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And yeah, may permanent peace be reached in all areas of conflict. And yeah, thank you all very much. Thank you.
And we would all echo that. This is it's a world that's torn, isn't it? It's with huge respect for the terrible times in the Middle East. It's not just there. The world around us is a hugely troubled place, and we should enjoy. I say this to anybody, we should enjoy the best that we have in this country at this time and in this place. Thank you. Councillor Julie Young. Hello, Julie.
Leader, councillors, good evening. I just wanted to make some brief points around on three items on your agenda tonight. The first is on health and housing. I thought it was a really interesting report that you've got on Cabinet Papers tonight. Lots of good stuff in there. But like a lot of documents, the proof is in the eating, isn't it? And how we actually implement some of the stuff. And it was reminded me of a paper that went to Tendring District Council on 19th February 2020. And that was called Breaking Barriers. And it was under the guise of health innovation and economic growth. And I mention that because I was quite excited to see that, not that I was there present myself, but the most eminent people in the country connected with public health made their way down to Clacton. And they had 2 days there, one of which was Professor Marmot, and he was reflecting on a decade on fair society, healthy lives at the time. And, I was quite excited to see that. And there was the Royal Society of Public Health there were local health partners, there were people from the Department of Health and Social Care. And of course it was just before COVID, so, a lot that was talked about before, kind of got, passed over, I suppose, when we were dealing with COVID. But I just wonder, reflecting on that, how much change there has come as a result of that, such a high-level discussion. And I think at the time there was talk about the Department of Health opening a public health office in Tendring at the time. Don't think that has ever happened. But I suppose it made me reflect on the paper that you've got on the order paper tonight, and actually, what are the outcomes, I suppose, for me? We might have outputs, but what are the outcomes that we're expecting from this? And I think, going forward is something that this council and the future councils do need to reflect on, because my own ward of Greenstead is poorer today than it was 10 years ago. The life expectancy, which you'll see in the report, is in terms of healthy years, there's a discrepancy between Wivenhoe and Greenstead of 15 years, which is staggering. So we're not doing very well. And that kind of brings me on to my second point, which is about housing. And I've spoken to Philip earlier this evening, and he's had an email from me today. But I've got 2 cases in my inbox at the moment, both single parents with small children, both in 3-storey blocks of flats on the opposite ends of the estate. And they're both dealing with damp and mould issues, and I think one of them will find their way to the Gazette fairly soon. Maybe it's structural difficulties with the block of flats, but a lot of this is connected with fuel poverty that we know. And we've got to find a solution to this, because these children are ending up, I was talking to my hairdresser only to the day, and she'd been up at the hospital with her son, who is just got over cancer, 7 hours sitting at the hospital with her child who's now got tonsillitis. So, we know the demand is huge up at the hospital, so we need to resolve these damp and mould issues. Of course, that's in the report as well. Just 2 other things. I totally think we should go back in-house for the greening and neighbourhood services contract, as much as anything, because Tendring and Braintree have an in-house contract, and as we move towards Unity Authority status, we need to align ourselves with what the other authorities are doing. And on glyphosates, I think anything that's carcinogenic we should steer well clear of. It's just not worth 100,000, frankly, if one person gets contaminated as a result of using glyphosates and ends up with cancer. Thank you for your time, Leader.
Thank you, Julie, as ever, for your thoughtfulness across a range of issues, and we'll have heard all three points. We'll have the discussion about glyphosates, and you can tell we have our own deep reservations, and I'll repeat again, whatever is in question is not about a return back to the future. This is about just weighing up, in my view, the narrowest of reasons for the narrowest of uses, but that's a conversation we'll have. If I may, I think the rest I suspect we're all again in a similar sort of place. I'll ask Laura later on if she has awareness of that past work, its relevance to the present. We'll touch on that. I won't pull her in now, but I would say two things. The first is that you're absolutely right, and it's my reservation, which I'm sure colleagues can talk to, that when we set policy, and it is a complex environment, health, and the relationship between health and all the partners, we absolutely need to be clear about, in as specific a way as we can, about where we are in any moment in time, and as you say, not just inputs or outputs, but outcomes. I know that, and I know that that's what's driving this work, and I'm going to assume your broad support for it, because the alternatives are, what are they? We have to work more effectively than we have. I don't want to give you too full an answer, or I'm taking some of my own space, but I just want to recognise that point is very valid. And the second of my two responses would be, as you know very well, Heart of Greenstead is the priority for us. If you look at the town deal, in terms of having recently, the years do go by, it's true, made a decision to invest in that place on the premise that investment in place is what's, if it's done thoughtfully, is most likely to deliver changes to life outcomes, which I guess is the heart of your point. I hope that's some assurance.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, then we will go to the main agenda. 7.1, here we are, what a nice segue. Place partnership approach for health and wellbeing and adoption of a memorandum of understanding. So, Cabinet, let me just give for the record a few of the headlines. There is a huge amount of material and a huge amount of thoughtful work behind this. I don't know whether Laura, you or Rory wanted to say anything before I go through this, but I'm not going to put you, genuinely not going to put you on the spot. As described in the papers, the Alliance is a place-based partnership, statutory voluntary services within the wider Suffolk and North East Essex Integrated Care Board, ICB. And that alone, many I know will find difficult to digest and difficult to relate to, but it's a crucial combination and set of opportunities for us as we seek, as just discussed with Julie Young, to address health and well-being and the determinants of health. Now, what we've got here are proposals that lead us to a memorandum of understanding that formalises the commitment and reinforces the way in which we will work. I don't intend to go through the papers in depth and detail. I am really clear that this is the right thing to do. For those who glance through some of the papers that are here, you will have seen illustration after illustration that, and looking to the future of who we might be working with, we have such huge differences in place and quality of life, length of life, that we have to reaffirm our determined endeavour to change that for the better. This is not in itself an answer, but it's part of the process and means by which we'll do better. Laura or Rory, is there anything you would like to say before I move on to the conversation?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Cabinet. Really only if there was any specific questions. I wouldn't want to kind of go through the report and kind of go through the information again. You've had the opportunity to look at it. I do appreciate it's quite detailed, but I am happy, as Laura will be, to take any specific questions if you wanted any points of clarity.
Colleagues, I'll go to Paul Smith.
Thank you. Yes, picking up on the point which actually Julie was raising about damp and mould, I think one practical example we can give of where we're working together is that Colchester Borough Homes has surveyed its properties to identify those that are most at risk of dampness and the poorer quality. That's being mapped with health data to identify those residents who are suffering poor health. And this is fully shown in section 4.25 of my report on 9.1. But I thought it was a good opportunity to bring it up to show a practical example of what is otherwise a rather wordy document of saying, well, actually, yeah, look, we've got these people with poor health that's related to poor quality housing. And actually, if we can tackle the poor quality housing, the health service could save an awful lot of money, and therefore a small investment by them in the housing stock will improve outcomes for everyone. And that's really what this sort of thing is all about. And I think it's very good that we're one of the leading authorities in the country in doing this sort of work here. And it shows how well things are working now between us and the local health service. It wasn't always that good, as I recall in my distant memory. But I'll just leave that as a practical example.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. That's really, really helpful. Rory, while you're there, I do have one particular question, and it's really, I want to go back again to the conversation we had before we got to the paper, which was around outcomes alive to the complexity of where we're at. And would you give us just a few thoughts about how you expect this relationship is going to be clear about what of a range of outcomes we might choose, which ones we might select? I know some of this is in train, some of this no doubt lies ahead. And as it was raised in the scrutiny conversations, which we'll get to later on, that sort of sense of resource implication, because this is about also promises and carrying them through, again, alive to that earlier conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So you'll see in the documentation there are high-level priorities in terms of addressing the inequalities in healthy life expectancy that we see in Colchester and tendering. And action to address inequalities, as you'll appreciate, are driven by kind of deep-rooted and structural issues. So kind of really knotty things that are difficult to address by kind of single actions, and it requires a collaborative partnership approach, and hopefully that comes across in the documentation. Of course, the drivers of poor health are kind of sit within the wider determinants. So there are socio-economic factors, there are factors in relation to the built environment, kind of access to quality of services, etc. So the approach that we're proposing, and I am mindful that what we've set out here is an approach. The next stage is the co-production and work with stakeholders across the Alliance to get into the detail in terms of identifying the indicators and the measures of success. Now you'll see there is a kind of a data report, and in that data report you will see very deliberately there are kind of some measures associated with the built environment, with health behaviours, with socio-economic factors. So it gives us a bit of a baseline in which to work from. So we will be able to begin to understand through a wide range of interventions whether we are beginning to have an impact on some of those indicators. So it will give us an idea of whether we're beginning to turn the curve on some of these deep-rooted issues. It's very difficult in some circumstances to get kind of early indication, because as you'll appreciate, some of the outcomes might be, these things are kind of transgenerational, particularly in relation to investment and housing. You'll see benefit in the long term. So it's quite complex, but to give Cabinet reassurance is that we've got a series of workshops now planned with Alliance colleagues where we'll be getting very much into the detail and trying to identify the things, as much as we've had a brilliant track record of working in partnership in North East Essex, we have to recognise that some of the inequalities are heading in the wrong direction. We've got communities, where good health is furthest from the reality. So, what we've been doing before hasn't had the impact it needs to. I think the focus will be very much equally on the things that we can do together. Clearly, lots of organisations are doing great work and will continue to do business as usual, interventions and projects. So I think there was a question in scrutiny around direct action. Absolutely, that will continue. What we're trying to emphasise through the work in the Alliance is the work that we can really only achieve success if we do it together.
Thank you, Rory. Councillor Goss-Martin.
I think this is a good piece of work. It happens elsewhere And as you say, the good relationships are ongoing. My particular interest is around leisure, and this will drive things like redevelopment of Leisure World, which is absolutely needed because let's face it, it's only slightly younger than some of the people around this table, and bits fall off it or slides go out of commission in the middle of the school holidays, which, you know, reputationally for the council isn't good, and it isn't good for people's enjoyment and health. And we saw a decline of people attending for that very reason. So this, for me, fully supported. I hope that we're not just going to have lots of waffle and wordy workshops. We're going to have real action coming out of this, stuff that the public will understand and really appreciate how we're trying to drive people's health. And I would commend this, and let's get on and let's push this forwards and make it happen and really, really make this done at pace, because I do see this stuff going on across the public sector, and I sometimes think we just take far too long when this is needed now, because we've heard from Julie tonight, we've heard real life examples where we are failing the public because their health is in decline. So let's get on with this.
Thank you, that's cracking. Natalie.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I fully endorse this paper. I mean, at the heart of it, it's all about prevention, because the sooner you can intervene and stop someone's situation getting much worse, then the better it is for everybody, not only for that individual, but obviously for resources as well, because you don't need so much resources further down the line. If you can actually stop somebody getting into a situation where they could be losing their home, which can lead to mental health issues, or mental health issues can lead to losing their homes. If you can intervene much earlier on down the line, then it's a much better outcome for that individual. It's a much better outcome for all the agencies involved, and yeah, it's just it's good all round.
Thank you very much indeed. Rory.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it probably strays into the next item, but I think a key point here is that through the creation of a local health and wellbeing board, we'll have oversight and an opportunity to receive assurance that we're making a difference and having impact in the way we want to. So to go to Councillor Goss's point, through the workshops we will develop a place partnership health and wellbeing plan for Colchester, which will be specific, where we'll identify the down to the detail, the short-term, medium-term, long-term things we will do, with the view that then the local health and wellbeing board will have oversight of that. We'll be able to monitor performance and make recommendations into Cabinet or into the Alliance Committee as necessary, and we've not had that opportunity to have that kind of oversight and assurance in this way before.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, look, we'll, as you've just said, we'll find ourselves walking into similar territory in the moment, but just dealing with 7.1, and just, look, I just want to sort of make sure we do take away what matters most. You know, the acknowledgement in the report that in the past we've got ourselves lost in too many priorities, you know, that acknowledgement's really important. So a real focus to this, we look forward to that plan, you know, with time and outcome as much as we're able to, but also demand on us as partners, requiring as we will, the best we can secure from government and the National Health Service and all those who work in that collective, you know, the collective aim of better health, that we now, this is a time where policy intent has to turn to practice. So saying prevention is more important and more likely to be successful in health outcomes than clinical intervention, which is still, let's be frank, the preference of large parts of the NHS. You know, we've got to make this move and play our part, and it's great we've got this opportunity to do that. So, colleagues, the recommended decision is to approve the memorandum of understanding between the Colchester City Council and the Alliance and endorse the place partnership approach that's set out here. Agree? Thank you very much indeed, Roy. You can stay there, Roy. I'm not going to let you go that easily. So thank you very much indeed. Yes, to Chief Executive, and then I need to go to you, I know.
Thank you. So I know there are other discussions to be had, so thank you for allowing me to speak. So there are just some very, very brief points I want to make. First of all, I think we need to recognise what I consider to be courageous and innovative leadership in this space. Many of the people who have led this work are in this room, and essentially this is groundbreaking work. We have an integrated team here and it's acknowledged at national level, and we're lucky enough to have Laura Taylor-Green representing us at national level on a number of advisory boards, that North East Essex is way ahead of the curve. However, there's no room for complacency. I think the important thing here is that the MOU and associated changes that are in front of you this evening signal a level of maturity that will be really, of the system partnership, that will be really difficult to undo. And we know that as we go into LGR, there is a risk that we will lose some of our progress so far and that we will have to rethink some of our arrangements. This will stand, I think, that test. And with our partners in tendering, take us forward into the new unitary arrangements in a way that I think creates an opportunity, and I know my colleagues do too, to do something even more innovative in a unitary type arrangement going forward. So I just want to commend the work of officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Pam. Absolutely agree with that, and I'm really grateful for work that's on the edge is always difficult, and work inside other bureaucracies. And I'm looking towards Laura, and thank you, Laura, for attending ours. As you have that scrutiny with alongside Rory. So, thank you again on behalf of all of us for what you're doing. And, we know we've got senior leaders like Ed Garrett who are taking the best of here and having it listened to elsewhere. So it is fantastic that we can make changes that may have national implications and could feed back in ways that we can deliver results and change. So look, thank you. I'm the monitoring officer, I'm sure, was wanting to remind me, I did touch on it earlier, that of course we had a scrutiny panel recommendation, which the good news is, for those who've seen this, and I'm sure you all have, it recommends that we adopt the memorandum of understanding, which of course is our intent as I understand it. So all content? All right, thank you very much indeed. Item 7.2. This is the related subject, the creation of a Colchester Health and Wellbeing Board. The clear directives from government focus more resources, so it's the same related conversation about prevention of ill health, reduction of inequalities. We're the only authority, although it's not a formal obligation yet, but look to the future as a unitary, if that's where we headed, it seemed we will have deep responsibilities in this place, even deeper than the ones we're seeking to take on board now. And a health and wellbeing board, it feels odd given our ambition that we haven't got such in Colchester, and it would facilitate the way that organisations work and the degree of amplification of voice that we have. Is there anything that colleagues would like to draw out from the paper? Nat, please.
As you say, we are an outlier in not having we're the only second tier authority in Essex not to have a health and wellbeing board. So this action on inequality requires both regional and system level intervention in addition to local and direct action, because the drivers of poor health and outcomes, as we know, they're deep rooted and structural, as we've already discussed with the Alliance Place. So and again, it's a move to a prevention agenda rather than reacting to a crisis. So it's proactive as opposed to reactive, and as I say, it drives better outcomes all round.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other views from colleagues? I should refer to the scrutiny panel and item 7.2 on this. Scrutiny made 3 recommendations. We should consider the resourcing implications, explore the responsibilities for such, and ensure that portfolio holder reports on the work of the new board are provided to the scrutiny panel on a regular basis. Now, from my perspective, I think these are entirely practical recommendations. We have to translate, walk through the papers looking for, I think so we're at a stage where, although some of the implications financially and otherwise and resourcing are plain, others are implicit, and so I think there is a piece of work we can take away here. So I'm content if colleagues are to take those recommendations and work them into our way of working, including the reporting back. I think that that's a helpful thing to do. We've got real ambition. We've got every reason to have some confidence about what we're doing. We should share and show. Natalie, would you agree?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, colleagues, so bundled together 7.1 and 7.2 to to approve the creation of local health and wellbeing board for Colchester. Do we agree? Thank you very much. Thank you, Roy. You're excused, and I mean that in the best of ways. Thank you very much for popping up. I thought that was a helpful rounding out of our conversation.
Thank you, Chairman.
Laura, thank you also very much for taking the time to come here again. We move on to item 8.1. That's on corrected or improved again. Greening and street care and safety fit for the future. And Councillor Luxford-Vaughan. No, I just want to make sure because you have an interest in this too. So just Martin, please. Yeah.
Thank you. This paper has already been scrutinised at great length and has been discussed at great length. But in essence, what we're looking to do is to move forwards with the next stage of fit for the future and also the future of grounds maintenance, along with, of course, trying to integrate everything into the £5 million a year neighbourhood service as well. I've been a councillor for 18 years, and I think neighbourhoods and greening have been married, divorced, and now they're coming back together again, all under the same roof. And that is all part of the fact that they all touch the same areas in the street. They cut the grass, they pick up the rubbish, and sometimes leave some of the rubbish on the grass. So we need to stop that. So what this paper is doing is moving that forwards, is proposing that we look to do a discovery phase to potentially bring the grounds maintenance back in-house when it ends in 18 months' time in 2026 with ID Verdi. And that, again, as Julie Young had mentioned earlier, is in line with both tendering and Braintree, where it's not an in-house contract, as Julie described it, because you can't really have a contract with yourself. You can have a service level agreement or an operational level agreement. You can't have a legal agreement with yourself. But what you can have is an internal workforce, and that is exactly what we will look to do. I've always been a fan of this. I was disappointed when we extended the contract, but there were reasons why we had to do it at the time, because I think you get more firepower, I think you get more pride, and I think you get more diversity in how you can push the workforce to serve for the best of Colchester and the wider area as it will become as devolution and LGR move forwards, whether we agree with it or not. So in effect, I recommend 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 to take this forwards into the discovery phase and the next steps in looking at moving this work forwards. I don't think there's anything controversial in here, and I will commend it to Cabinet to approve.
Thank you. Colleagues, anything we would like to add? No? Then look, Martin, thank you. And some of our officers, key officers are here, and to you, you know who we're talking about. You know, thank you for the huge amounts of work you do for Martin as portfolio holder and for us and therefore our residents. You know, you're managing people as well in very large numbers relatively, and managing us is difficult enough, but managing staff and all the challenges Martin's alluded to get more difficult. Thank you all very much indeed. So are we content as Martin's described? Please.
Okay. Just remember you have a recommendation again from the scrutiny panel on this item, Leader. Page 10 in the supplementary agenda.
Thank you. How helpful. I go from one piece of paper to another. Councillor Goss will say, I'd love it. Okay. Colleagues, I'm hoping that you've had a chance to look at the recommendations. There's a fairly full note there as well. And a thoughtful conversation. I'm sure Councillor Goss will agree, which we welcome the challenge as well as the support. So the recommendation in the supplementary agenda, the Cabinet agreed to proceed with the discovery phase, as mentioned by Councillor Goss, to assess the requirements for an in-house grounds maintenance service when the current contract ends in 2026, with discovery phase to include business cases which address information requested and points raised in the scrutiny panel's discussion. And as you said, Martin, you know, there's a lot of support for this. Anything else on that? If not, back to the point we're content. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Monitoring Officer, for monitoring. I think we next go to... Oh, I'm being reminded of the time that we've had 90 minutes and we normally break. Right, so I'm going to give us 10 minutes and be back. So it's 9:26 before we get into the next item, which I think might be interesting. So come back, please, just before 22. Thank you. Good to go, Robert? Okay, good evening, everybody. Round two, and review of greening Colchester policy. My thanks to the officers for producing the report after an environment sustainability meeting. We've had some thoughtful contributions earlier, and which I know Cabinet colleagues and I want to reflect on tonight. And we've got three visiting councillors as well, Councillor Harris, Councillor Gocher, and Kamal, Councillor Kafugro. So could we have you in turn, please? So start off, Dave, would you come forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader, and good evening, Cabinet, and good evening all. A lot has been said already about the greening, and I absolutely endorse what Councillor Goss said earlier on and Councillor Young's words about bringing it in-house. So I'm fully agreeing with what you've done there. There's another reason I agree with you, because one of the things that wasn't illustrated was the chain of command. Having it in-house gives people career paths that they may not have already had, and I think that will develop staff and actually encourage people to do better for our town and for our city. But I really wanted to come here today to talk to you about glyphosates. I'm here because the Beerchurch residents, a group of them, lobbied me. They were really worried that we may turn to using them, these particular products, on anywhere where children work, play, go to school, parks, the end of their cul-de-sacs, they sit on the paths, etc., talking to their friends. And the use of these particular weed killers, they felt needed to be some passion about it. So I'm here to display the passion that they gave to me. This glyphosate is linked to bee population decline. You probably know that. You probably know that it's very much demonstrated to be declining in bee populations. There's been 19 deaths worldwide over this type of thing, and the World Health Organization actually said it's carcinogenic, as Julie Young said earlier on. Now, glyphosate's found in many weed killers that blocks the enzymes that's vital for plant growth, we know that, but it's also been linked to respiratory issues, asthma, nose irritation, and it's toxic to fish and birds and kills beneficial insects and soil organisms that maintain the ecological balance, and we heard that from Martin Pugh earlier on. I just wanted to make it very clear that I personally don't think we should use them at all. We were right to not use them in the first place, and I can't see any situation where I feel that it would be justified to use that in the interest of economy when there's children's or adults' health at risk, and certainly the health of our the animals and insects and plants, birds and fish that we share our planet with. So for me, I would lobby you, and I would like to think that you would listen to the people that were speaking earlier on with passion, and the people that follow me as well, about the demonstrating the use and the unwillingness to have used this particular product. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And I'd grateful if you could leave us just reflect on if that's okay, because I think we'll be the better for taking the earlier remark and those that will follow you. If any member wants to come back, and then I'll invite you forward, if that's all right. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for your remarks of support for what we're doing in terms of Fit for the Future and our staff and their progression. I think we're all very much on board with that too, so thank you. Could I ask Councillor Mark Gocher? Mark, would you like to come forward on the same basis, if that's okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to endorse as well the comments made by the previous speaker and others tonight. I also welcome the taking back of greening in-house. I think that's a positive step. And as my ward colleague has asked me to say, given that waste and greening may well be under the same team now, because we have compactor bins, maybe that will free up time for some of the waste team to actually get involved in some of the greening work, and maybe do a bit of weeding, but I stand to be corrected on that if that's not the case. But anyway, and on the issue of glyphosates, I understand that a decision is being made tonight, but I'm a bit concerned that I read an article on the Gazette Facebook page this afternoon which seemed to imply that a decision had already been made. In response to a press release by the Green Group, a response was given by a council spokesman, unnamed, saying we will be putting it just in dots on certain leaves and here and there and so on, as if this is a fait accompli. So my first question is why, who gave that press release? Has it come from an elected member, in which case no problem at all, that's fair enough, that's their opinion. If it's come from an officer, I'm a bit concerned that officers are giving press statements that seem to preempt decisions made by democratic bodies. So that's my first question. In terms of the wider issue, a few years back, the Progressive Council here, led by Councillor Mark Corey, took the decision to stop using glyphosates because of the health concerns, as well as the environmental concerns. This follows the Dwayne Johnson case, where Dwayne Johnson successfully sued Monsanto Bayer and won millions of pounds in compensation because he was a sprayer of this chemical and got cancer as a result. I have personally witnessed Essex Highways operative spraying this stuff in Winnock Road on one of those scooter things in high wind with no safety mask on whatsoever, and the stuff was just blowing straight back into this guy's face. And if that's not a health issue, I don't know what is. But my main concern, like the previous speakers, is that this may well be sprayed near children's play areas, in Castle Park and in other areas across Colchester, where children play. I've already heard that it's proposed to possibly bring it back for the Roman wall, whereas Colchester Natural History Society will tell you there are valuable plants in and around that wall that can't be found elsewhere. And it just seems to me to be a completely retrograde proposal. Yes, I'm aware that it proposes some kind of partial reversal, putting it here and there and dabs here and there. But you won't save the money by doing a partial reversal. If the whole point about this is to save money because the cost of not using glyphosate is too high, blah, 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 you won't save the money by just having a tiny little partial reversal. This is going to be the thin end of the wedge to the return to using glyphosate. How else will you make the saving? To me, this is a completely retrograde proposal, and this is something with national significance. When the glyphosate ban came in, following a report that my ward colleague put together and was presented to council, I received emails from all over the country asking, how did you do this? How did you know? And it wasn't just us, obviously it was Councillor Corey's council that took the decision. But I received emails from all over the country from other councillors. How did you get this through? We need to do the same in our area. And it wasn't just from Greens. So this is a reversal of this. Think about how this will be seen. And I'm going to phrase the next thing very carefully. It could be seen, and it's certainly not your intention, it could be seen as almost Trumpian, meaning a retrograde reversal of a progressive reform. And of course that is not your intention, I know that, and it's not an accusation, but spray, baby, spray. Golden age of spraying. I'm talking about how it could be seen, how it could be perceived as we can get this reversed. And it's something that could have national significance. And yes, okay, people will grumble about there being a few weeds here and there, but in the words of the poet Alexandra Pope, we should not be breaking a butterfly on a wheel, i.e., there are other means, there are gentler means to deal with weeds where they are a problem, going through pavements, etc., which is highways anyway, without bringing back dangerous, potentially carcinogenic chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Bear with me if I do respond to one piece. of the many things that have been flung this way, Trump or Trumpian has not been one yet, but and we have actually, in all seriousness, I know you speak vividly, and that's really important to get our attention. But I think it's very important equally, bear with me if I say that we are going to be measured about this, and that between us we ask for the same. I hope you'll understand why I do. But anyway, I shall reflect on Trump again tonight and look in the mirror. All right, look, thank you. So this is not about that. But thank you, Mark. Let's go round the conversation again if we need to later on. All right, thank you very much indeed. Kimal, if you would. There you are, sorry. Look at your brother.
Dear all, I want to start my speech by thanking the leader of the council and Councillor Luxford Vaughan for agreeing to have a meeting with me with just 1 day notice. During the last ESB meeting, Green Group found the report focusing purely on finances, failing to acknowledge the positive impacts of this ban on health and wildlife. Following our appeal, members of the ESB were unable to endorse the original version and referred it back to officers. One important point I want to mention is that the current version of this report has not been reviewed, scrutinized, or voted on by the ESB. What's more, despite the ESB directing responsible staff to engage with stakeholders, all my attempts to assist in reaching out to local communities such as residents' associations, schools, scouts clubs, environmental charities have been ignored. When considering 46k cost, we also need to consider the training and value that a guide dog brings for its visually impaired companion, which is around 67k. The Veterinary Poisoning Information Service in London recorded 150 cases over an 8-year period of dogs exposed to glyphosate, where 45% of them exhibited mild to moderate clinical signs and roughly 15% were classified as serious. Therefore, when we consider costs, we need to be mindful of risk it poses to our residents with guidance, therapy, and medical aid dogs. Children's health is also at stake. Do we know what's the cost of a glyphosate-free Colchester per resident is? How much money we are spending per person to keep our playgrounds safe for children? The answer is £0.23. You heard it right, it's 23 pence per resident. Compared to the council's annual income from council tax, do we know how much of it we are using to have a glyphosate-free Colchester? It's 0.3%. Spending 4% of a month-long council tax income is enough for a year-long glyphosate-free Colchester. Banning glyphosate was a legacy of campaigners and residents. It was also a groundbreaking decision made by Environment and Sustainability Panel, which was founded by Councillor Corey, and equally a proud legacy that the former Lib Dem cabinet endorsed. Castle residents, members of the Natural History Society, Young Essex Assembly, and young parliamentarians of Colchester are all concerned. Please hear their voices and defend the uploadable decision that you unanimously took 5 years ago. This report is failing to list community collaboration, which has been tried and tested. It doesn't include opinions of ecologists, our climate officer, and in absence of this crucial information, I would like to appeal to my colleagues and ask them to refer this report back to officers. I'm genuinely concerned, worried, and stressed. I know those feelings are shared by colleagues in this chamber, as well as our residents, young and old. On 22nd of June 2023, I attended an ESB meeting and highlighted the importance of training, supporting, and recognizing our litter warriors and weed pickers. During that meeting, I was informed that Colchester Litter Warriors activities were extended to weed picking. However, in January 2025, during a community volunteers meet and greet event held by the mayoress, I found out that even the leader of the community volunteers was unaware of the weed picker scheme and that it had been included in the weed pickers remit. I have been doing my best to not only provide feedback, but also provide solutions and assistance, and it is deeply disheartening that despite my efforts, no one from Waste and Greening team heard me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kamal. All I would just say briefly is we will all have noted in the report that you put forward suggestions and from your perspective evidence, proposals even, and didn't get a formal reply. That was acknowledged, and I'll make sure that we follow that up outside of this meeting. Just one other thing. Strain and stress come from many things, and I'd hope that you'll feel less so come the end of this, because we're as thoughtful now as we were thoughtful before. And I repeat again, wherever this goes, this is not going back to the past, and there will be a misrepresentation to suggest that. It's very narrowly framed, the conversation which we'll have. But thank you again for your interest and your passion in this. It's good to hear from other members always, which is why we'll always do between us our best to be available when we can to you and to others. So thank you again. I'm going to open this up now if I can, but I want to just refer Cabinet to the report from Environment and Sustainability Panel, which, as you'll have seen, over several pages captures the conversation. It resolves that it's reviewed the report, requested an update which to be submitted to Cabinet, which of course has happened, and recommended, and that has translated pretty much into the recommendations themselves, that the report be considered the use of glyphosate-based herbicides be reviewed in detail, and so on and so forth, as they've described. It's not, however, when you look at the main body of the report, quite the same kind of language, because what we have in front of us is a series of, frankly, part choices and some, I think, understandable observations about our wider duty, which has to include, we have to maintain things, take a care for property, for our heritage, be safe. But as I say, in the paper itself before us, on page 268, to be clear, we've got to continue or not with glyphosates in general use, and then we get to the narrower definition around which I think we can deal with a conversation. It's absolutely rightly said by Kamal that the paper, this revised paper, has not gone back to the panel, and that's perhaps a question for us either now or later to consider, because we do the best of our contentious business in a joined up way. So I'm going to stop at that. I'm going to ask for observations on what you've heard tonight and where we are, starting with Councillor Luxford Vaughan, and a fine for whoever is unfortunate enough to have their phone on. Andrea.
Thank you, Leader. I'll just thank you to all the speakers on this issue tonight, because obviously it doesn't come specifically under my portfolio. So although I've read the papers, it was as a reaction to your invitation to have a meeting, Kamal, that I went off and did some independent research, and it was actually very helpful to have a meeting with you, because I'd not previously heard what your suggestions were going forward. I share everybody's concern about staff safety, the risk to the public, wildlife, biodiversity in general. I had some specific questions that I don't know whether we can answer tonight, but they're to do with when our licence runs out, because according to the report, I think it's December this year, and then on a more long-term basis, whether we in the UK will ban glyphosates, because other countries have. So I think we need to look at long-term trends in that as well. There is obviously the hideous thing I've got to mention, which is devolution and local government reform. I've looked at what Braintree and Tendering are doing. We have to have a mind to that, because whatever we want to do now or in the future will have a bearing on those two, that long-term partnership. But in general, and also I've talked to Mel, thank you very much for that report. I've seen what you're talking about is it's not a question of just bringing back glyphosates. Generally, from that ban, we've reinvented the service really, and actually we've found different solutions to lots and lots of different problems. So, you know, things like we use streaming much more and we mulch much more, which is obviously a progressive move. But I think for me, the definition of if there is a justification for using them in even a very controlled, small circumstances, I don't think that's defined enough. And I think it does need scrutiny, additional scrutiny, from people perhaps better qualified than myself. And so that's, you know, where I'm at is that we're not ready to make this decision, and I'm very uncomfortable with it.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin, please.
So I think I only ever deal in facts, and I do find it frustrating when facts are wrongly conflated or the wrong information is presented, because it gives the impression from some of the speakers tonight or some of the stuff on social media that we're going to reintroduce glyphosate fully across Colchester. That has clearly never been said, it's not in the report, and it's not ever left any cabinet members' lips. It has to be really clear that Essex County Council puts glyphosate in every street in Colchester, because they spray every highway more than once a year in the gutters and the pavements to remove weeds. That is fact. And we've had that conversation with Essex previously, and they have got absolutely no intention to stop using glyphosate. So for people that are concerned, I'm afraid it's in your neighbourhood now. It's in your street, it's in every gutter in Colchester and on every pavement, and it comes up. One of the biggest complaints that we've certainly had, or I certainly get as a ward councillor, is the state of the weeds in the roads and pavements. And it's a huge issue that gets raised by residents, a huge issue, and in fact, a lot of people do raise it. It causes massive concern across quite a populace of Colchester. You see it online, you see it on emails, and that is fact. In fact, actually, in the growing season, or in the peak of the growing season, it's one of the biggest complaints I get. So clearly, even what Essex are doing isn't working. And I know that there is closer working between our neighbourhoods team and road sweeping, because the idea is the roads and pavements are sprayed, and then we come along with the road sweepers and try and sweep it up afterwards to get rid of it. So we are trying to deal with that. That isn't going to change in terms of that glyphosate being sprayed in the roads at the moment by Essex. Whether devolution changes it is a different matter. What we're talking about here in this report, and this has been to the Environment Panel twice, because this is an updated paper, and I think in the appendix it does say that the original report actually recommended from an earlier Environment Panel meeting that it comes back to Cabinet with a tight wording on what you can use and when, and the word droplets was or single droplets was in that recommendation, and I think it was over the months of March and April, something like that, and that seems to have disappeared somewhere. So the only reason that this is being considered is because there are certain cases where strimming weeds doesn't work, because you do that and they grow back. We've had to shut playgrounds because they are overgrown and you can't use them because they're full of stinging nettles. Broadlands Way in St John's is one thought, and I'll tell you now, 2 years ago, Mike Hogg, who we know is not very well now, he and I went in there barehanded, pulling out loads of weeds, loads of nettles and thistles, etc. And we did that all by hand, and we left that to be collected. And we did that because it was getting unusable. It happens every year. So what we're doing in there does not work. It's as simple as that. However, we also don't want to widen the use of it across Colchester, because I absolutely agree there are questions about it. More widely, any front garden in Colchester could have glyphosate in it, because people will just buy it from a DIY store. Now, if I do use weed killer, I actually buy non-glyphosate, because it's obviously supposed to have less of an impact. I do notice it's not as good, but it's a safer alternative. So we have to do something to ensure that playgrounds are safe and some of the other areas highlighted work. And whether glyphosate is the right answer or not, I'm not a scientist, and in fact I'm not aware of any scientists in the council actually that have done studies on glyphosate, because we're not qualified, and I apologise if we have got qualified scientists that have done reports on it. But I've just done a bit of Googling, and actually, interestingly, I've come across a scientific report, and obviously you can look at it yourself. Basically, Cardiff City Council carried out a scientific experiment with the University of Cardiff and with Dr. Jones, not Indiana Jones, but a Dr. Jones, although Indiana Jones, I'm sure, could pull weeds out with his whip. And they actually tested glyphosate, foam and one other approach. And actually, whether people agree with this summary or not, they actually concluded that glyphosate was the best thing to use on the highway for a number of reasons, including how much water, extra water is used in foam, for instance. So it's all in this report that I've just come across from Cardiff City Council. So, you know, it's like anything, isn't it? You can have one report that says one thing and one report that says another. I'm not qualified. I'm not a scientist. I can't be qualified either way to comment. I'd be happy for this to go back for another look, but there are also no scientists on the environment panel that I'm aware of either. The one thing I will say is that the litter warriors are not there to pick weeds out of the pavement. That is not what they're there to do. They're there to pick litter. And given that I do it 6 days a week, I'm afraid I don't have time to start picking weeds out of the highway. It's not what litter warriors are there for. I think the clue is in the title. They're there with litter pickers picking up litter. Getting weeds out the pavement or out the road is completely different. It becomes different with health and safety, etc., etc. So that is not in the remit, as far as I'm concerned, of the terms of reference of litter warriors. So I think we just need to be clear. And as I've said to officers as well, if you think you're going to run a service on volunteers, you're living in cloud cuckoo land, because we are not going to get enough volunteers that are going to go and remove weeds from the highway or pick all the litter. It's just never going to happen. You can use volunteers to a certain degree, but the word is in volunteers. They will work when they want, they'll do what they want, they're unpaid. So you cannot manage them to expect them all to turn up or to say, can you do this once a week at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday? It's not going to work. So I think we need to be a bit careful on what we think about in terms of, you know, suddenly we'll run services on volunteers. It's not going to happen. They're an important factor, but they're not paid staff. That's something I really need to be clear on. And the final comment is that the probation service, you know, that might be an option for some more heavy duty projects, and we have done that. But again, it's also not the full answer, because that also comes with all sorts of health and safety. You can't have somebody working on a highway, I think over 30 miles an hour, and they have to have a toilet nearby. So I don't think our householders are going to want probationers using their toilets in the greatest respect. So again, there's a lot of red tape around using the probation service, because I've looked at all these things and suggested them. So I am up for pushing this back to the environment panel, but what I don't want this to do is just get lost in the long grass. Because if I have to shut playgrounds again because we can't maintain them to the right level, because we don't have the funding or the right, or because the growing season changes because of climate change, which it does, we need an answer. So I don't want this to get stuck back in there to come back. So there's a lot there, but I just wanted to try and give a balanced view.
No, thank you. Welcome, balanced view. If we could just perhaps do a couple brief extras for colleagues, and then we'll close this, because I think we know where we might be. Mark, and then Paul, please.
Thank you. I support it going back to the Environment and Sustainability panel. I think speakers have said tonight that it kind of was almost due a return back. And I think other full alternatives can be looked into. People have mentioned I was leader when I sort of looked into the campaign and took it forward and passed it. So I have a clear view that we banned it before, and I'm not going to vote to have it come back. I do feel that we need to get an understanding out there with our public that weeds are not our enemy. Biodiversity is actually what we're trying to encourage, and this chemical is toxic. It's toxic to humans, it's toxic to animals, but it's toxic to the environment. I'm not a scientist, but I do teach geography, and when these chemicals run into our rivers, that's a negative to much more than the environment that we can see. The ecosystem is affected by the toxic chemicals. So I think we need to ensure we keep our playgrounds open. We need to find ways of doing that. As you say, Martin, volunteers here and there is not the full alternative. However, they could be part of the alternative. Probation, as you say, could be part of the alternative. We also may need to accept the cost of this, because I think we need to accept the cost of keeping playgrounds open. And whether that is that we pick it by hand and we trim it more, we have to accept that, in my opinion. I think that our world is far too polluted by so many things, in a literal sense and a metaphorical sense, and we need to step back from continuing to go to the simple and easy solution of applying something toxic, and as I say, in a literal sense and a metaphorical sense. So for me, I won't go on about it, but I do think that wider consultation can still occur with the Environment and Sustainability Panel looking into it. We need to look at a full set of alternatives, and I think we need to speak to the public more about embracing biodiversity and loving weeds and not having to have everything pristine, and looking at ways that we can do it by hand and return to more traditional methods. I'll stop there, Leader. Thank you, and support it going back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Paul, please.
Thank you. I too have struggled with this one. To be honest, I really struggled trying to understand what the recommendation coming from the panel was. Were they saying that we should do this, that we shouldn't do this, that the proposal that they looked at was only for a couple of months? The proposal in here is for a year-round thing, and I didn't see anything in the report that justified that change. So I too think there's stuff here that we need to get to the bottom of, and again, it's not something that I'm an expert on, but what I do appreciate is that there is a clear economic cost to a political decision, and there's a cost to not using this, financial, and we take a decision because we're a council and not a business. If we're a business, it would be simple. We do everything at the lowest possible cost, but actually we're not. So there will be occasions when, with things like the real living wage, where we prefer to pay a higher price for something that is correct and the right thing to do. And that's really what I'm in politics for. So I really welcome one going back to the panel for them to have a look at it and to give a clear recommendation as to what's the feeling on this issue. Because there is a cost, but if we're getting a clear message that actually it's a cost that people are prepared to pay, I'm fully support that.
Okay, thank you. And finally.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with much of my fellow cabinet members here. Glyphosate is nasty stuff. We know it's the damage it does to biodiversity. We know it's harmful to humans and animals, and yeah, shouldn't be really anywhere near them. I mean, I could potentially see a one-off use if say halfway up the castle wall there was something growing out of it and it was ripping it out was going to cause further damage to the fabric, maybe. But as I say, I'd have to see what all the other options were before we actually went that far. So yeah, I think we need to refer this back to the Environment Committee just to get a bit more information about exactly what they mean, because as I say, the paper does seem a little confused, and I think it just needs further investigation before we can actually make an informed decision.
Thank you. I'll close then on our collective behalf by sort of saying that I'm in a similar place. I hope we've been clear tonight that this is not as it's been painted by some. This is absolutely a conversation we had about a very, very limited potential application, and if so, in the safest of ways. But we've raised some legitimate concerns. We've heard some as well, we need to be, I think, clear about costs and consequences and how narrow. You gave a great example. It'll be an unusual one, but it stands the first test, I think, that there is in all of these things some degree of balance having to be struck between the implications of any decision we make. So I'm going to take the collective view and stand behind it, that we refer this back to officers and, if necessary, back to the Environment Sustainability Panel. We need to be clear about what the options might be, weigh these up. I want to thank again, because some of the points made were answered if you look in the heart of the report. There's a great deal of work that's gone into this, and I'm really grateful that to our officers, I say this, that what you've done is bring us to the point where we're closer to a decision. And we are, by use of our time and yours, able to be clearer to the public. This is not, as has been suggested, going back to a world we've left behind, and I'm very happy to have left behind for all the reasons passionately expressed. Who doesn't want more wildflowers and more butterflies, more bees, and all the good? A much more relaxed approach to these things of recent years. As a council, we've been right behind. So this is a deferral. Thank you, Martin, as portfolio holder, for acknowledging that there is still a do something, but it's not a decision. It's not a decision based upon the recommendations. So I suggest to you, colleagues, that we pause on carrying forward, and as I hope I've summarised, we take this back for a fresh look and have this brought round again. Are we content? Thank you very much. My thanks to visiting councillors. I hope we've covered this in a way that you're content. If you could allow us to go on to the next item, I will be grateful. We should, for the record, just say that we have taken account of the report on the panel and their recommendations as part of our discussion and decision to hold and to review. Item 9.1, a real big welcome. He moves halfway to the table. Philip Sullivan. Philip, all the work you do as Chief Executive of Colchester Borough Homes is deeply appreciated. I'm going to refer to the portfolio holder in the first instance on item 9.1.
Thank you very much. State of the Nation report on housing. This is a very difficult report because we're not doing very well. There were more homeless families in Colchester this month than last month, and so on and so on. The pressures that we're seeing on the housing sector are extremely severe, and it's not just here in Colchester. We get the reports from the Public Accounts Committee, cross-party recommendations, pointing out the serious deficiencies in the funding of local housing allowances, the fact that social housing is facing, as we see, a string of increasingly costly regulations. Quite rightly, improved standards for damp, and we've heard again the dangers of damp and what have you this evening. But these are costs that are piling up on a sector that is struggling. And what's the alternative? For many, there's very little alternative. When I first bought my house, Leader, and I suspect you as well, the banks very kindly would lend us 2.5 times our income. Maybe 3 if we smiled very nicely at the bank manager. That was fine. In Colchester these days, it's between 8 and 9 times the annual income to buy your own house. So that option's gone. We're then looking at renting. The private rental sector, extremely expensive, and Section 21 evictions, where you can be evicted at no fault at the end of your tenancy, still exist. Hopefully the government will get on and outlaw them, but until they do, many landlords are taking advantage of the regulations and getting rid of tenants. That's adding to the homelessness situation that we're seeing, along with many other factors. Now, this council has taken action on homelessness with the Beyond the Box initiative, where we now have over 130 households in accommodation with Beyond the Box rather than in bed and breakfast accommodation. Imagine what it's like bringing a family up in a hotel room. If you're really lucky, you might have a microwave. If you're not, you've got a kettle. That's all your cooking facilities. Washing? Well, there might well be a bathroom, but laundry? Nothing on site. Services? Nothing. And again, you could be made to move at very short notice. Because if you're homeless, the council can direct where you go. And theoretically, we could direct you to one hostel, one accommodation one night, and another night in the next one, and so on. Try bringing up a family in that, maintaining contacts. It is a dreadful situation that we're seeing. And there is really only one alternative, and that is to build more affordable homes for rent. And that is something which this council would love to do. We'd like to do a lot more in this, but of course, we have the finances. And as we know, the costs of building properties is more by the time you've paid the interest on them than you're getting in the rents that are being set. And the government has done the right thing by increasing rents by inflation plus 1%. That is helping, but that's only catching up on the money that we had lost when the rents were capped at 7% when it should have been 14 or 15%. This is a serious problem, and this is what we're trying to address. I have one other request to you, Cabinet, tonight. There is approximately 80 right-to-buy requests in the pipeline at the moment. These came forward when the government decided to reduce the subsidy but didn't do it immediately, so a large number of people applied. If those receipts do materialise as sales, and not all of them will, I think we should be using that money as soon as possible to repurchase properties and get back as many of those properties as we can. Because at the moment, our plans this year are to acquire or build 30 new properties. If we're losing 80, you can do the maths yourselves. This crisis won't get any better. We need to do more. And that is the state of housing at the moment. I wish I had some more good news, but what I will do again is commend the work of our officers, particularly the efforts with the Beyond the Box initiative, where we've had ministers come down to have a look at what we're doing. Using surplus student accommodation for temporary accommodation is great. The facilities down there are extremely good, and the staff at Beyond the Box have got a real care and concern for the residents down there. So I fully support what they're doing down there. That, as I see it, is a state of the nation at the moment.
Thank you
Happy
very
to
much.
take any question.
Thank you very much, Paul. Mark.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Philip, for you and your staff's work. Paul, you paint a very realistic picture, and it's sad that we've ended up here over years of underinvestment into housing across the nation. But I do thank you for your leadership and again, Philip, for getting some solutions in Colchester, and Beyond the Box is one very tangible example, changing people's lives in our communities. I just wanted to say, Paul, do we look at the 3 points that you have outlined, and for me to add further to the right to buy? Do we continue, when we have ministers come here, do we continue to lobby our local MPs as well on 3 things? The local housing allowance, which is still set at the 2011 sort of market estimation, or I don't know if they've updated it, I'm not sure. I think they've given us a bit more, but it's still based on 2011 rate. That means that in terms of the cost of homelessness, it does not meet the costs that we as a council pay, so that puts us further behind. Secondly, to lobby for the immediate passing of the legislation on no-fault evictions. And lastly, the right to buy. So I absolutely support the use of receipts, but to lobby the government to say, put a moratorium on right to buy to enable the housing market to rewrite itself.
I really feel they need to go to that extreme to do that. I would support those 3 points being brought up with local MPs and ministers when they next visit. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Summers next.
Yeah, no, I echo that, Mark, that it is a really sad state of affairs, and that Councillor Smith paints here. I have family members myself that are in insecure accommodation, and I know the struggles they've been through over the years to try and get suitable accommodation for themselves at a reasonable price, rent-wise. You can't underestimate how much having a secure home can make a difference to people's lives. Not having the constant mental stress of wondering whether you're going to be in the same house this time next year, and not through your own choice. And as I say, yes, having a family in a hotel is an absolutely dreadful situation, and the constant moving, making children's mental health much worse, because obviously moving further away from their schools, their friends, and as I say, not having the facilities, a garden to play in, and obviously separate rooms from your parents. You know, you don't really want to be in the same rooms as your mum and dad all the time, and for the parents having those cooking facilities and laundry facilities that, you know, and that's what Beyond the Box does give. So I think that's a fantastic initiative, and I can't commend you highly enough for that initiative, Paul, and the officers that you work with for getting that in place. But yeah, the local housing allowance not being updated for 14 years is absolutely appalling, and it's one of those things that has led to, you know, our housing bill being so high, and as I say, it's not sustainable. Something's got to change.
Thank you very much indeed for remarks. I'll come to you, Paul, last, but Martin, you want to say something briefly?
Yes, well, I think it's some very good, strong, passionate comments from a number of people tonight. But there's also the impact on the fact that many of the people that end up in temporary accommodation are vulnerable. And we've seen that with Sea Trade House on North Station Road, where we get constant complaints about some of the behaviour that goes on and some of the people that turn up trying to sell drugs. And that impacts on the community on North Station Road and also on North School. And I recently actually went to the Travel Lodge at the Northern Gateway to meet a resident who was classed as homeless. And I heard their story, and in fact I'm now supporting them personally because I was so moved by their story. But one of the things they told me was that whilst they were in a different hotel, they actually had to ask to be moved because of drug dealing going on, quite open drug dealing, which was affecting their health, because that was exactly what they were trying to get away from. And this was openly going on at the Travel Lodge in Fearing. So I think we need to investigate that situation and find out what's going on, because we have vulnerable people housed in there, and we have drug dealers turning up trying to push drugs on very vulnerable people, and that's something that has come from somebody at the coalface. So, you know, that literally was from a conversation less than 2 weeks ago. So I think the work our team do in extending and difficult circumstances is outstanding, because this must also put stress on the staff that have to deal with this every day, because every day in Colchester and of course across the UK, people are being classed as homeless for a multitude of reasons. But I do get concerned when we continue to build or give planning permission for, but we have no choice, where we do extend some of these temporary accommodations like Sea Trade House. And there's a lot of that going on in North Station Road. I don't see that as the answer, because there is a big rise in antisocial behaviour from some of the things that go on in that area, and it impacts the existing community. We are limited to what we can do about that, because of course some of it doesn't need planning permission. And again, if we're changing legislation, then government needs to have a look at the impact that has on communities as well. So I thought that was worth bringing that into the conversation.
Thank you, Martin. It has. I mean, that focus between all of us on people in a, let's be honest, a desperate position or on the edge of it. That's the thing I always add. Lots of people just not quite in that terrible position you both describe. As we've mentioned a few places, we have to do that with care. So I'm quite close to what's going on in North Station Road. And there's lots of effort being made to get a better balance about the use of accommodation. To be frank, this is about individual behaviours as well, in a society that condones a lot that once would have been considered unacceptable, drug taking or dealing and everything else. So, the legalities and the realities of life, do conflict, don't they? So, officers need some specifics, and then they can pass this on. I know you'll understand that, Martin. But as I say, in terms of North Station Road, the council, and Nat is aware of this, is doing all it can to be supportive of those who are troubled by the movement of people in difficult circumstances. We can just perhaps leave it at that. But thank you very much. The words are rightly put, I think, in the sentiment at least. I'll go back to Councillor Paul Smith. Paul, would you and or Philip like to close on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll invite Philip, if I may, through you, Chair, to say a few words. I think, by the way, Mark, I think you said 2011 for when the benefits were freezed. I think it was frozen a bit before that. But Philip will tell us on the details there. So I think it goes way back. And of course, we're only getting 9% of that benefit.
Philip.
Thank you. So in terms of local housing allowance, benefits have been capped over the years. Local housing allowance is the 2011 figure is specific to Mark's observation. But just again on responding to that, Councillor Corey, the government hasn't uplifted that. But what I would say is that the City Council, through the portfolio holder, lobbied in December on that, and you'll see that the Public Accounts Committee in January shared our view, shared the City Council's view. So, they'd have had a number of observations come through to them, but the City Council has lobbied specifically on that. The government hasn't uplifted it yet, but they have asked DWP to consider that position. The second question, Councillor Corey, in terms of banning of no-fault evictions, that is in the House of Lords at the moment under the Renters' Rights Bill. No date for implementation, but it is in an advanced stage in terms of the legislative journey. And then in terms of the moratorium on the right to buy, so there have been some restrictions on the right to buy that were brought in about 3 or 4 months ago, and there is an active consultation out at the moment as well. One of the areas being consulted on is a moratorium on any new build properties coming through, but there is wider consultation. We'll await the outcome of that. And in terms of Beyond the Box, thank you for those observations, and Pam has been sharing that best practice with government ministers, and with, again, the support of the portfolio holder. We have expanded that recently, and a further report will be coming to Cabinet in early summer to explore further options as well. Thank you.
Paul, anything?
Thank you very much. Just a couple more points, if I may pick up on. You quite rightly pointed to the Public Accounts Committee's recommendations. To be fair, Culture didn't do the lobbying on their own. We joined with over 100 councils led by Southwark in an initiative to get it through, and that did involve meetings at the House of Commons with ministers, and our certainly Culture's MP, Pam Cox, was there at that meeting. I'm not aware of either of our other 2 MPs attending that meeting, but they may have been there, I don't know. One point I didn't stress about Beyond the Box is they also have an excellent closed-circuit TV system down there, which will make anyone's attempts to indulge in antisocial behaviour very effective. Apparently, they had some instances with students misbehaving down there in the past. Obviously not in my day, but that's the case. And one other thing on the homelessness allowance that we get from the government, if they're in bed and breakfast accommodation, we only get 1 allowance per family. So even though we might have a family with, say, two teenage children of different sexes requiring 3 rooms, we only get 1 allowance, which, as you say, has been frozen for a huge number of years, and it just doesn't keep up. One final point, just to tie up with local government reform, our local housing allowance at the moment is based on a combination of Colchester and Tendring's rents. If Braintree was to be included in there, that would lead to an increase because rents in Braintree are higher than in Tendring. So that would help increase our local housing allowance figures. But just a point for that one, which I thought might tie up nicely on the evening.
Thank you very much indeed. Look, thank you everybody for all the contributions. Philip, for the work you do behind and for the report, which is a model of clarity in my view. I doubt if you'll find many better across the run of councils with a responsibility, all taking it seriously, but we've got ourselves to a place where our understanding is as rich but also digestible as you likely to find anywhere, in my view, and we are lobbying between us really effectively. And Paul, I want to thank you. It's the right thing to do, acknowledge that it's the network effect, including using our MPs or helping them to do their best alongside us, that is a shared credit and improves our prospects over time of making change. So thank you. Please pass back to the team, as was others have acknowledged just how much difficult work we know gets done. When we refer somebody who's come to us, that's the beginning of a difficult journey for that family and for the staff who are doing their best to balance that with everything else. So I know we say it to you every time, but it's the right thing to do. So thank you personally, and thank you to the team, to you, Paul, and the rest of the colleagues around the table. We're united on this. It's the right thing to do. We're doing better than many are, but it's worrying how many problems we've got lying ahead of us. So thank you all very much indeed. Okay, this is for noting the report, but I want to go to you, please.
There was a suggestion about a decision around the use of receipts. So was that a formal decision that the Cabinet need to make?
Not at this stage, but I hope the Cabinet will bear in mind, if those receipts do start coming through, that in the next municipal year, we will be looking for authority to use those receipts to buy additional properties above the 30 that's currently in the programme.
Thank you for holding us still. In my view, this is within the gift of the portfolio holder to have that kind of latitude. We are collectively in favour of doing all we can to increase stock. So, Paul, if you need to come back to us any time formally, then of course do so at that time. But thank you, Richard, for holding us still for a second. Okay, colleagues, we're content to go on to item 10.2. Corporate key performance indicator targets.
No, 9.2.
Oh,
The linked housing paper.
I beg your pardon. You love it when I race ahead. Memo to self. Memo, yes, indeed.
I'd like to spend some money, please.
No, I'm afraid we're going to go right past 9.2. So
that's fine. It just means all those decisions come back to Cabinet, and you'll have a very long agenda.
Well, I think we've proved we
convincing argument, I think.
Anyway, all right. So thank you very much indeed. Right. So 9.2, delegated authority for the ward of HRA contracts. Paul, please.
Thank you. This is to give me authority to deal with the maintenance contracts as set out under the specified terms there. Otherwise, any contract over £500,000 would come back to you. And clearly, in the housing portfolio, there are substantial contracts. The ones for kitchens at the moment is for many, many times that level. I'm conscious not to quote the exact figure because of the confidentiality on it. But it's something which we have done in the past, and so I would ask that you delegate responsibility to me to deal with those in due course, in line with the programmes and the budgets that have been set out.
Thank you. I think we don't need a long conversation on this because this is our standard practice. It's set in a framework of decent homes and other standards and a policy approach to maintenance. Mark.
Can I just say I understand that we get good value for money out of the way that Colchester Homes delivers our housing arm, but I just wanted to refer to the work that I know is underway under Paul and with part of the HRA review going on, that we are looking at the costs and we're looking at the way in which we renew and support residents, and how, again, due to the constraints of finances, we are having to be as flexible as possible in terms of looking at every option as to how to reduce cost in order to provide more housing to people in the long run. Is that correct?
Absolutely, you're quite right to point out that currently we are spending more on maintaining our housing stock, around about £800 a property a year, compared to the average of 650. And so we will have to look at ways in which we can do it. We do have an extremely well-maintained housing stock, but in light of what we're seeing on the financial pressures, I think we're going to have to accept that some of the nice-to-have features are going to have to be looked at again as to, for example, how often we replace kitchens or what have you. We need to make sure that we're getting full value out of those. And so I think those will be looked at. Towards the £650 mean, which would produce substantial savings, which can then be reinvested in, for example, more new properties.
Thank you, colleagues. Anything else that anybody would like to add? If not, then Paul, thank you. We'll go to the recommended decision, delegated authority to you for the award of as many contracts as cost effectively as possible. And a serious point about viability here, which is we've got this responsibility, haven't we, for the people in those 6,000 homes where we've got to ensure that what we do stands the test of time and finances. It's got to work at the bottom line. Thank you all very much indeed. We agreed? Okay, thank you, Mark, for the observations as well. We spend an awful lot of money on housing, don't we? As is set out in the report.
We do, and it costs us an awful lot of money if we haven't got enough housing through temporary housing.
Yeah, quite. Right, can we now go to 10.1?
Yes.
Permission to go to the award of the internal audit contract. Councillor Jay's unfortunately unwell, not able to join us. The report here, which has been passed us and has been passed, if I recall correctly, governance and audit in terms of internal audit review, but I think what we've got here is just the award itself to TIAA Limited with effect from the 1st of April 25 for a period of 3 years with an option to extend for a further 2. Now, all I would sort of say for those who have heard this talked through at governance and audit and elsewhere at scrutiny, there's a high regard for the company, for due processes being followed and the appointment is recommended. Are there any views beyond the one I've offered on this? Are we content to award as set out in 2.1?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Just glance to my left, the monitoring officer, it's always a good test. Are you in the right place? Okay, 10.2 is corporate key performance indicator targets. Now, members of Cabinet, in effect, have a responsibility for a portion of these, but again, Councillor Jay does a cracking job of representing our collective interests. We will have been through this again together. This is not new. It's been tested in different parts of different committees at different times. The importance of it is illustrated by the fact there's an inch of paper here, because this, in terms of depth and detail and its relationship to strategic performance, is, it's plain. We need to know what matters most. We need to be able to describe it well and be able to support it. And I'd like to, Pam, if I might, just to pass back through you to the team, that we have got ourselves into, in my view, a good position here in terms of, and I know that you in the senior leadership team and your board and other conversations with heads of service are looking at this as well. So this is not just for us, it's for the whole of the organisation to track what matters. For those who care, and I hope you all will, 5.3 onwards gives you some illustrations of this, and it's worth probably pulling out just a couple in Alison's absence. So, council tax and business rates. It really matters that we collect well. Nobody likes a tax, but the reality is that raising money in the equitable way that we do this enables us to fund the services that matter to all our residents, and we are, in my view, from what I can see, both pushing performance where we can upwards, but also, and I know Mark, you'll be well faced of this, we are best in class. Residual and recycled waste, Martin, it's your joy to have that amongst many other difficult responsibilities, but again, we're doing really well on this relatively. We know there's plans to do better. We know government are changing gradually what their demands are going to be of all local authorities, but as is illustrated here, we've got a strong performance we should take some pride in. And we talked about housing, didn't we? Well, satisfaction with repairs, that's at 90%, and we seek to push that to 91%. And there'll be measures around that as well. I think we can be encouraged that that's the right kind of approach. We are collectively on our game and happy to be challenged about it. And a couple of small other examples, housing benefit and local council tax support. If you're in the position to need a decision to get that in a few days, when some others take many or even weeks, it's the things you can lose sight of. This makes a difference to the health and happiness, frankly, the quality of life of residents often in a difficult position. There's a lot more than the illustrations I've given, but I think this is a very comprehensive report, well expressed, with some great examples of a focus on performance, and falling under that or hitting it either way, being frank about it really matters. Councillor Corey, Mark.
Thank you, David. I think you've highlighted the best points in the report very well, so thank you for that. I just wanted to say that this has been through Governance and Audit Committee, so they have scrutinised the KPIs. And secondly, I think the highlights you point out and also the wider KPIs show that despite the financial difficulties we continue to go through, meeting deficits and reductions in spending year upon year, we still manage to deliver quality services. We still manage to deliver high percentages in the 90s of collection rates, of satisfaction rates. So yes, there are complaints. Yes, we don't always get everything right. But as a council, Colchester remains ambitious in developing our infrastructure across the city. It remains ambitious in supporting communities. It remains ambitious in delivering services. Despite the financial cuts that we have to continue to make, we are still delivering on those key performance indicators. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, and very well made too. Colleagues, anything else that anyone would want to add to this?
Sorry, Leader, again, you do have an extract from scrutiny panel
in the supplementary. Thank you. Well, bear with us a second.
Excuse me, could I ask, Monitoring Officer? They go through both governance and audit and scrutiny. What's the process? Because I think one sets them and one checks the validity of them. Can you just...
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay.
Oh, thus my reference to it. But thank you for specifically drawing our attention to the supplementary paper. It is true. We do in the year look at through governance and audit. I think through how we are doing, and scrutiny. We have that annual process of taking a view on what we should do ahead. In effect, both committees do a measure of both, which is entirely reasonable. We should look forward and glance back. Councillor Smith.
I think this is a historical thing. Originally, it was all under scrutiny, but scrutiny found their workload was too great, so various items got delegated, if that's the correct term, to governance and audit. So we have the situation where, yes, the targets are set by one place and monitored in another. So be it. It involves more councillors, which I suppose is a good thing.
That aside is worthy of note. Thank you. Thank you for drawing attention back to the formal note that we've had. At least our recollections are the same, that we have been in those meetings and have seen, in all seriousness, how we work as a council depends upon the contributions of our committees. I want to thank them for a number of occasions tonight where their work has been called in support of our own decision-making process. And I'll be grateful if we could, Richard, put a note back to the chairs of governance and audit and scrutiny for for their work during the course of the year and for their support and contributions, their critical challenge, and how they help us make decisions in Cabinet. Tonight's been several illustrations of that. To the report itself, in the supplementary agenda 10.2, there is a two-page, to my eye, entirely appropriate capture of a robust conversation and explanations in response. The recommendation is that the corporate KPI targets for 25-26 as presented to scrutiny papers should go forward to Cabinet for approval. We've had those now, as I say, as tested, and actually they were improved by the conversation because it drew out the need for us to do more in terms of robustness in support of performance scoring, which in turn underpins what we do next. So, colleagues, are we content that we've done our duty by both?
Agreed.
Thank you. Proceed accordingly. Right. We corrected, no doubt, but I think we have appendix agenda item 11.1. Responses.
That's right, Chair. I've nothing to add to the report.
Councillor Corey.
You informed me that when I was away from the start of the meeting that a member of the public had their say, and I think it was Sir Bob, who I get on with well, and I just wanted to make clear on the record that Alison J is suffering from COVID and is not here for that reason. And I was not here at the start of the meeting because I was at parents' evening, not because I'm a parent, but because I'm a teacher and had to fulfil that part of my job, my day job. So I got here as soon as I could and have participated in the meeting. The first part of the meeting that I did miss, I was listening to on the travel up, was also involved with the Health and Wellbeing Board, which I am chair of, so it probably was less appropriate for me to actually be here in the room checking my own homework. So I just wanted to make that clear as a response to the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and we all engage with Sir Bob in different ways, and I shall drop him a personal line to refer to that. Anything else, colleagues, on the final item of our agenda? I look at the officers to see if they're going to point out we missed 3 items somewhere.
Leader, you do have a confidential minute on your agenda, but you don't need to go into private session if you just want to agree that minute.
Agreed?
Agreed those minutes. Agreed.
I'm really disappointed I can't make the Deputy Leader read out the very lengthy summation. All right, okay. All right, on that basis, can I thank everybody? This has, been quite a substantial session, hasn't it? But we've engaged with members of the public and our fellow members, and we've had a conversation of some quality. So thank you, and to officers as well.
Thank you all.